Kevin Miller, and I'm joined by Senator Tom Cotton. Good morning, sir. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well, Kevin. I hope you and all your listeners are doing well, too.
Doing well. Hot, but there's not much you can do about that.
You could say that again.
All right. You introduced something called the Charles Duncan Buried with Honor Act. What does this act do, and why is it needed?
So the act would allow veterans who die without the means to afford proper burial, a casket, or cremation to be buried not just in a national cemetery like we have in Little Rock and Fort Smith, but also in state cemeteries. It's any veteran's right if he dies without the means to have the Department of Veterans Affairs pay for the burial in a national cemetery. Unfortunately, sometimes space is limited or not available at all in the national cemetery. For instance, in Little Rock, has happened with Mr. Duncan, so he ends up being buried in Fort Smith instead. But what that means is that his family has to travel over 150 miles just to visit his gravesite to pay their respects or lay flowers or what have you, at a time when we have plenty of open spaces in the state cemetery. So I've introduced legislation that would extend that right, not just to national cemeteries, but to state cemeteries as well, so all of our veterans can be buried at the closest spot where their families can go and pay their respects to their gravesite. I think that it's the least that we can do for all those who served our country in uniform and defended our freedom.
How has this been received in the Senate?
Very favorably. The Senate actually introduced the law that allowed for the free burial in federal cemeteries just a few years ago. I don't think they expected that federal cemeteries might be full and it might result in the movement of a gravesite hundreds of miles away from one's family. I'm going to be testifying in front of the Committee on Veterans Affairs later this month, and I'm hopeful that at some point this year we can put this very small but very important bill on another piece of legislation and pass it and send it to the President's desk for his signature.
Senator Tom Cotton, I don't think it's any secret you've not been happy with the President and some of his policies. The Senate passed the National Defense Authorization Act. You put out a statement. You talked about the President's failed policies with the military and the resources. What do you feel has been missing there for those in the military, not only in the U.S., but across the globe?
Well, that's a long answer that we could go take in a lot of different ways, Kevin, but most simply that we simply have not been funding our military to meet the threats that our country faces. The military is one of the few departments of the government where we should have a budget that's based on our strategy, not a strategy that is based on our budget. And for years, we've seen cuts to the tune of hundreds of billions of dollars to our military, to the point where now some of our pilots over Iraq and Syria are having to fly extended missions because aircraft aren't ready to replace them, or they're not being able to fly their missions because those aircraft aren't ready. Some soldiers and Marines might have to deploy without the full scope of training that they truly deserve to fight overseas. And we're eating our seed corn. We're not investing in the kinds of capabilities we need for the next generation of warriors. So at root, so many of the problems go back to simply underfunding our military, and we need to substantially increase our military spending.
Senator Tom Cotton, you had a chance to question the Air Force Chief Nominee about wartime capabilities, readiness, and modernization of the nuclear triad. Let's simplify this. What was the conversation about, and what did you want to get out of it?
Well, this is another example of how these questions really do come back to funding. So I've had Arkansans who are flying over Iraq and Syria, or whose sons are flying over Iraq and Syria, tell me that because of a lack of funding, they're having to cancel missions or having to extend missions to unreasonable lengths because our aircraft simply aren't ready to fight the fight today. Nuclear modernization is an example of eating our seed corn. Our nuclear weapons are an essential deterrent against aggression. Some people say that we shouldn't spend so much on weapons that we never use. I would dissent. I would say, first, we only spend about 3 or 4% of our overall military budget on our nuclear deterrent. And second, we use those nuclear weapons every single day, and we have for 75 years. But the Obama administration is already talking about reneging on its promises to modernize our nuclear weapon systems because they're not adequately funding the Department of Defense.
I heard a bell ringing. Was class in session now?
Little man is self-teaching right now.
Oh, okay.
Boy piano.
Oh, there's nothing wrong with that. He's musical. I like that. Senator Tom Cotton, a couple of bipartisan bills on prison reform that have been out there. You haven't liked them. With those, what would you like to see happen when it comes to prison reform, or do you think that the current system is working?
Well, now, prison reform in particular, I would support, and some of the legislation that I've opposed does, in fact, reform our prisons so they'll be safer for both prison guards as well as prisoners, and give prisoners the skills they need if they're going to get out of prison and go back and to be a productive member of society. The thing that I object to first is releasing violent and repeat felons, which this legislation would do unavoidably. There's just no way around arguing that. I think locking up violent felons and making them serve their full sentence is one of the reasons why we've seen a decline in crime over the last 25 years. Another measure would prevent states like Arkansas from detaining juveniles for a period of days when they violate a court order. So if a juvenile judge tells a 17-year-old boy, you need to start going to school, you need to stop skipping school, and he ignores the judge's order, the judge needs a way to enforce his order. The judge needs to be able to get his attention. And this proposal would eliminate Arkansas's ability to do that. Not all counties do it. Some counties use it a lot, though. I don't think Washington should be dictating the way that our states and the way that our counties approach their juvenile justice system. That's a decision for them to make based on the best interest of their communities.
Listening to your son back there, too. What a great guy.
He doesn't like getting locked up in his playpen.
Oh, no. Who does, Good to hear him getting his jam on this morning, too.
Yeah.
How fun. Thank you very much. Appreciate the conversation, Senator Tom.
Thank you, Kevin.